For more than 8 centuries, England tried and failed to fully conquer Ireland. But why? How could a small island so close to England resist one of the most powerful kingdoms in Europe for so long? The answer isn't found in a single battle or treaty. It's hidden in the land itself, the people who called it home, and the history that shaped their spirit. Long before the English set foot on Irish soil, the island was already alive with its own rhythm, its own order. Ireland wasn't a kingdom in the way England was, a nation ruled from a single throne. Instead, it was a mosaic of dozens of small territories called tuatha, each led by a local king or chieftain. Power wasn't commanded from above. It flowed through families, clans, and ancient ties of loyalty. Blood and oath bound communities together, and alliances were forged in ways no foreign invader could easily untangle. This was a land that refused to be simple, a land that resisted centralization. The English would soon learn that to conquer Ireland was not just to take its towns or castles, it was to understand a culture entirely different from their own. And that culture was protected by something more powerful than armies: its people. Farmers, poets, and warriors alike shared a sense of belonging that couldn't be bought or broken. The geography of Ireland itself was another barrier. Imagine rolling hills disappearing into bogs, forests so dense they swallowed entire battalions, rivers that twisted like serpents through the countryside. Every march became a battle with the land itself. English soldiers, trained for the rigid formations of open field warfare, found themselves bogged down, ambushed, and defeated by terrain they could barely navigate. The Irish didn't just fight the English, they used their homeland as a weapon. And it wasn't only the land that defended them. The Irish legal system, known as Brehon law, was centuries old. Unlike English law, which demanded obedience to a crown, Brehon law worked through restitution, honor, and reputation. Judges, known as Brehons, interpreted these rules not as tools of power, but as guardians of balance. To outsiders, it seemed chaotic, unorganized. To the Irish, it was the glue holding society together. Language was another fortress. Gaelic wasn't merely a means of communication, it was identity itself. In every poem, every tale, every whispered story by the fire, the Irish kept their history alive. When English lords arrived expecting a land waiting for their order, they found instead a people who had long claimed it for themselves. So when the first English ships crossed the Irish Sea in the 12th century, they were entering a world already whole. The stage was set not for an easy conquest, but for a centuries-long struggle, a clash of ambition and resilience, steel and spirit. The English could claim titles, build castles, and issue decrees, but in Ireland, something far older waited, a people who knew their land, their law, and their language, and refused to surrender them. The English did not arrive in Ireland as conquerors, not at first. Their story began with a plea for help, a desperate appeal from an Irish king seeking to reclaim his throne. Dermot MacMorrough, exiled ruler of Leinster, had been driven from his lands by rival chieftains. With no army of his own strong enough to take them back, he turned across the sea to England. King Henry II of England granted permission for MacMorrough to recruit Norman knights from Wales, men known for their skill with sword and siege engine. Among them was Richard de Clare, known to history as Strongbow, a warrior whose ambition would soon intertwine with Ireland's destiny. In 1769, Strongbow landed in Wexford, not as a conqueror, but as a mercenary, answering an invitation.
Yet, history has a way of twisting intentions. Within 2 years, Strongbow's men had captured key towns like Waterford and Dublin. MacMorrough reclaimed his throne, but in doing so, he had unknowingly opened Ireland's door to a far greater power. When Henry II saw his Norman vassals gaining influence in a land so close to England, he realized the balance of power was shifting. In 1171, Henry himself set foot on Irish soil, declaring himself Lord of Ireland. Castles rose, towns were fortified, and English law began to creep across the island. On paper, England had arrived to assert control, but Ireland, like the land itself, had a way of resisting even the strongest armies. The Normans, surprisingly, began to blend with the people they were meant to subdue. They married into Irish families, adopted Gaelic customs, and even learned the language of the land they were supposed to rule. Within a few generations, these Old English settlers were more Irish than English in spirit. The conquerors had become part of the very story they were trying to rewrite. Meanwhile, the Irish clans adapted their strategies. They didn't fight only with weapons. They fought with patience, cunning, and the knowledge of every hill, river, and forest. Ambushes became a way of life. Raids struck suddenly and disappeared just as quickly. The English could hold castles, but the land beyond them remained untamed, defended by invisible armies of local knowledge and loyalty. Even the English crown struggled to maintain authority. Ireland was far from London, a distant concern amid England's wars with France and Scotland. Royal edicts and statutes might look imposing on parchment, but enforcing them on an island filled with fiercely independent chieftains was another matter entirely. It was here, in this early period, that the first lesson became painfully clear. Conquest is more than boots on the ground. Castles and laws could be built, armies sent, titles given. But the heart of Ireland, its culture and its people, could not be subdued so easily. The English had arrived, but they had not conquered. Over the next century, the story repeated itself. English authority ebbed and flowed like the tides against Ireland's shores. They could claim Dublin, establish the Pale, and assert temporary dominion, but beyond the walls, the clans remained sovereign in every sense. English victories on the battlefield were often temporary. For every castle captured, another region slipped back into Gaelic hands. And through it all, Ireland remained alive with its own rhythm, laws, language, and loyalty that no king could rewrite. The stage was set for a centuries-long struggle, a conflict that would not be measured solely in battles or treaties, but in identity itself. The English had learned an uncomfortable truth. To step foot on Ireland was one thing. To control Ireland, that was another story entirely. By the 14th century, more than 100 years after Henry II first set foot in Ireland, the English grip on the island had begun to slip. What had once seemed a solid foothold had shrunk into a fragile, narrow strip of land around Dublin, known as the Pale. Beyond it lay a very different Ireland, Gaelic in law, language, and spirit, a land the English could occupy, but never fully possess.
Inside the Pale, English settlers lived by English law, spoke English or French, and looked to the king in London for authority. Outside, Gaelic chieftains ruled their lands with independence, guided by centuries-old customs. They held courts, enforced Brehon law, and carried on a way of life the English crown found alien and confounding. It was a world where conquest on paper did not equal control on the ground. Even the Norman settlers, the supposed agents of English authority, were part of the problem. Many had intermarried with Irish families, adopted the Gaelic language, and embraced Irish customs. By the mid-14th century, the Old English were more Irish in spirit than their homeland counterparts. To the crown, this was an alarming development. It meant that the very people sent to enforce English rule were becoming part of the culture they were supposed to dominate.
The English tried to stop this cultural blending. In 1366, the Statutes of Kilkenny were enacted, forbidding English settlers from speaking Irish, wearing Irish clothing, or adopting local customs. But the laws were impossible to enforce. The blend of Irish and English culture had already root taken. No decree, no king, no army could undo what the people had created organically over generations. Distance and distraction worked against the English as well. England was rarely at peace. Wars with France, Scotland, and internal conflicts drained attention and resources. Ireland, though close in miles, was far in priority. The Crown's authority weakened while local lords, both Gaelic and Anglo-Irish, grew stronger. Every uprising, every raid reminded the English that Ireland could never be fully tamed. The geography compounded the challenge as well. Thick forests, mountains, and bogs weren't just obstacles, they were allies to those defending the land. Ambushes were frequent. Armies marched for weeks only to find themselves trapped or starved. Even well-trained soldiers struggled to control territory when the enemy knew every hill, river, and forest like the back of their hand. And yet, it was the Irish identity itself that was the most enduring obstacle. Language, law, and faith all carried the essence of Ireland forward. Attempts to suppress Gaelic speech or Brehon law only deepened attachment to them. Religion, though not yet a point of wide-scale conflict, provided another thread of unity. The Irish understood who they were, even when surrounded by foreign banners. By the late Middle Ages, England's conquest had withered into something fragile and uneasy. The Pale was a narrow foothold in a land that resisted control at every turn. Battles were fought, castles built and destroyed, yet Ireland remained only partially occupied. The English learned a critical truth. Conquering a land with armies is one thing. Holding it, shaping it, making it theirs was another. This period also revealed a pattern that would repeat for centuries. The conquerors often became part of the conquered. The Old English, the statutes, and the Crown's occasional campaigns all collided with Ireland's resilience. And in the spaces the English could not reach, Gaelic Ireland thrived, waiting, watching, surviving. It was clear, England could win battles, but they could not conquer hearts. The Irish had mastered the art of endurance. And as the 15th century gave way to the Tudor era, a new wave of conquest loomed. One that promised to be harsher, more determined, and yet even more fiercely resisted. By the 16th century, the English crown was growing impatient. Centuries of partial control, fragile alliances, and constant uprisings had proved one thing: half measures would never subdue Ireland. England needed a new strategy, and the Tudors were determined to bring the island under firm, centralized control once and for all. Henry VIII, a king known for his ambition as much as his ruthlessness, took the first major step. In 1441, he declared himself King of Ireland, elevating his title from Lord of Ireland to sovereign ruler. This was no symbolic gesture, it was a declaration. Ireland would now fall entirely under English law, English governance, and English authority.
But the English soon discovered that brute force alone would not reshape a nation. The island was stubborn, its people fiercely attached to their customs, their lands, and their independence. To try a more subtle approach, Henry introduced a policy known as surrender and regrant. Under this system, Irish chieftains were invited to surrender their ancestral lands to the crown, and in return were granted them back as English-style nobles, earls, barons, and lords under the king's law. On paper, it sounded like compromise, even peace. In practice, it demanded the surrender of centuries-old independence. Some chieftains agreed, hoping to preserve their estates. Others refused outright, unwilling to bow to foreign authority. And so rebellion simmered, sometimes erupting into full-scale war. Elizabeth I inherited this volatile situation and escalated it. Her reign saw some of the most intense campaigns to subdue Ireland, including the Desmond rebellions in Munster and the 9 Years' War led by Hugh O'Neill, the Earl of Tyrone. These conflicts were not minor skirmishes. They were national struggles, a fight for survival against a crown that sought to erase old Gaelic ways and impose a foreign order. O'Neill's forces were formidable, well-led, and at times supported by Spain, England's continental rival. The Irish used guerrilla tactics, raiding English settlements, striking swiftly and vanishing into the forests and mountains that had thwarted armies for centuries. The English responded with scorched earth campaigns, burning villages, destroying crops, and attempting to starve resistance into submission. The decisive moment came at the Battle of Kinsale in 1601. Spanish reinforcements, arriving to aid O'Neill, landed too late. The English forces overwhelmed the Irish and their allies, forcing O'Neill to surrender. By 1607, the so-called Flight of the Earls saw the last of the Gaelic lords depart into exile, signaling the official end of the old Gaelic aristocracy. Yet even in victory, the Tudors learned a costly lesson. Conquest had been achieved on the battlefield, but not in hearts or minds. Ireland had been subdued, but it had not been tamed. Rebellion, resentment, and defiance smoldered just beneath the surface, ready to ignite again. Religion soon became the next battlefield. The English Reformation, begun by Henry VIII, had turned Ireland into a testing ground for faith as much as control. The island, overwhelmingly Catholic, resisted the imposition of Protestantism. English authorities, seeing Catholicism as a threat to both power and national security, began enforcing strict religious policies which would set the stage for centuries of sectarian division. By the end of the 16th century, the English had learned an unyielding truth. Ireland could be conquered in war, but it could not be conquered in spirit. Every act of submission, every forced allegiance, only reinforced the island's identity and its people's resilience. Castles, laws, and armies were tools, but the true power of Ireland lay in its culture, its faith, and its unbreakable sense of self. The Tudor conquest had reshaped Ireland politically and militarily, yet the story of resistance was far from over. The centuries ahead would see new invaders, new policies, and new campaigns, but the same lesson endured. Ireland could bend, it could suffer, but it would never fully break. By the late 16th century, England's conquest of Ireland was no longer just about land, titles, or castles. It had become a battle for the very soul of the island. The spark came from England itself, the Reformation. In the 1530s, Henry VIII broke with the Catholic Church and established the Church of England, declaring himself its supreme head. A political move at home, it became a cultural earthquake in Ireland. For the Irish, religion was not merely belief, it was identity. Catholicism shaped their communities, their festivals, their rites of passage. It guided justice, morality, and the bonds that held society together. To impose Protestantism was not reform. It was an attack on the fabric of daily life, on the memory of ancestors, and on the laws and customs that had endured for centuries.
The Tudors understood this. They feared that a Catholic Ireland could serve as a backdoor for Spain or France, England's great rivals, to attack from the west. Religion and politics fused into a single mission: to control Ireland's soil and its soul. Plantations became the crown's primary tool. Fertile lands were confiscated from Catholic Irish families and redistributed to Protestant settlers from England and Scotland. The largest of these, the plantation of Ulster, permanently altered the demographics of the North. Communities were divided not only by culture, but now by faith, creating a dual Ireland, one Protestant and colonial, the other Catholic and native. For ordinary Irish people, this was more than an imposition. It was punishment. Masses were forced underground, priests were hunted, Catholic schools were banned.
Children learned their faith in hidden hedge schools, passing on a religious tradition that the crown sought to erase. Yet resistance took root not in armies, but in belief itself. Every secret mass, every whispered prayer was an act of defiance. Every clandestine school, a rebellion in miniature. The English had conquered land. They had imposed laws, built castles, and planted settlements. But the deeper conquest, the conquest of identity, remained elusive. For every policy enacted, the Irish found ways to preserve what mattered most: faith, culture, and memory. Religion also became a unifying force for resistance. Even when political and military leaders fell, Catholic communities endured. The faith provided cohesion, a sense of purpose that outlasted the sword. Irish soldiers, local militias, and even exiled lords carried the banner of religion alongside the banner of independence. When Spain intervened in the 9 Years' War, it was not just to support Irish rebels. It was to protect fellow Catholics in what was viewed as a besieged land. This spiritual divide would shape Ireland for centuries. The English crown, determined to impose Protestantism and English culture, found that coercion hardened the resolve of those it sought to control. Faith, like language and law, became an armor the Irish wore invisibly but powerfully. It created a population that could bend under pressure but never break completely. By the end of the 16th century, the English understood a truth they had long ignored. True conquest was not measured by castles or armies, but by hearts and minds. And in Ireland, hearts and minds remained resolutely, defiantly Irish. Every attempt to suppress the Catholic faith deepened resistance, fueled rebellions, and forged a spiritual resilience that would endure long after the Tudors. The conquest had entered a new phase. Land, law, and loyalty had been contested for centuries, but now the battleground was belief itself. And in this invisible war, Ireland proved once again that it could survive, adapt, and endure, even when every force seemed arrayed against it. By the mid-17th century, Ireland had endured centuries of war, confiscation, and foreign rule. Yet nothing would test the island like the arrival of Oliver Cromwell in 1649. Fresh from victory in England's Civil War, Cromwell landed in Ireland with a single mission: to crush resistance completely and secure absolute control for England. Cromwell saw himself as an instrument of divine justice. In his eyes, Ireland's Catholic population represented both political defiance and spiritual corruption. What followed was not mere conquest, it was punishment. Towns and cities that resisted were subjected to mass slaughter. At Drogheda, Cromwell's troops stormed the town after a siege. Defenders who surrendered were executed. Civilians, priests, and townsfolk alike fell beneath the sword. A month later, Wexford suffered the same fate. These massacres sent shockwaves across the island. Fear spread faster than any army could march. Some towns surrendered without a fight, hoping to escape the horrors that had struck others.
But violence alone could not secure peace. Resistance continued in remote parts of Ireland, particularly in the rugged west. Meanwhile, famine followed in the wake of scorched fields. Crops were destroyed, livestock slaughtered, and entire communities displaced. Thousands died from hunger and disease. Cromwell's campaign had decimated Ireland, yet the spirit of the people endured. After his victory, Cromwell implemented a new order. Catholic landowners lost almost everything, forced off fertile lands, and pushed into the barren West in a policy summed up with chilling clarity: to hell or to Connacht.
English and Protestant settlers, often soldiers rewarded for their service, received the best lands, reshaping the social and economic landscape almost overnight. The native aristocracy disappeared. Economic systems built on dispossession replaced the old order. Even in death, Cromwell's legacy haunted Ireland. His name became synonymous with cruelty, colonization, and cultural loss. Yet despite all the destruction, Ireland survived. Its people adapted, maintained their faith in secret, and preserved their traditions. They learned that endurance could be as powerful as the strongest army. The English had achieved military conquest, but it was incomplete. The islands were controlled on paper, but hearts and communities remained defiant. The restoration of the monarchy in 1660 brought new rulers to a bitter, divided land. Protestant settlers now held most of the power, while the majority of the population, Catholic and native, were marginalized. Harsh penal laws attempted to cement this hierarchy, restricting land ownership, education, and even the open practice of faith. But repression had the opposite effect. Underground hedge schools kept language, culture, and faith alive. Secret masses in fields and valleys ensured that Catholic identity endured. Rebellion flared repeatedly, from the Williamite Wars to the United Irishmen Rebellion in 1798, each crushed, yet each leaving a legacy of resilience and determination. In the 19th century, political figures like Daniel O'Connell showed that resistance could evolve from the battlefield to Parliament, proving that Irish spirit could adapt as easily as it resisted. By the dawn of the 20th century, the English conquest of Ireland had lasted nearly 800 years. And yet, despite wars, plantations, massacres, and laws, Ireland had never truly been subdued. Geography, political fragmentation, culture, and faith created defenses no army could entirely breach. Empires can seize land, but they cannot seize identity. Ireland had bent under the weight of conquest, but it never broke. Its people, through song, story, and faith, preserved a memory that no king or law could erase. The English had conquered the body of the land, but never its heart. After centuries of invasion and resistance, one truth stands clear. Ireland was never truly conquered. England may have taken castles, confiscated land, and imposed laws, but it could not take identity. Every attempt to suppress language, faith, or culture only strengthened the resolve of the people. The Irish adapted, endured, and passed their stories forward like sacred fire. What began as conquest ended as survival. Ireland outlasted kings, parliaments, and empires, not through armies, but through memory. Its faith, its songs, and its stubborn pride transformed suffering into purpose. Even today, the ruins of castles, the legends whispered in valleys, and the melodies carried across hills speak the same truth. England's conquest failed not on the battlefield, but in the heart of a people who refused to forget who they were. So what does Ireland's story teach us about power, resilience, and identity? It challenges us to consider, can a land ever truly be conquered if the spirit of its people remains unbroken? If this journey through Ireland's untold history moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know which stories of resistance inspire you most. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We'll continue uncovering the hidden histories, struggles, and triumphs that shape our world. Ireland's greatest victory was never on a battlefield. It was in surviving, remembering, and refusing to be erased. And that, more than any war or treaty, is a story worth telling.